The issue of why we must attack one another has been echoed in the ruins for millennia. Peace treaties signed in marble halls by ancient civilizations, and even recently, in the divisive discussions that predominate on social media in a society that takes into why does conflict still exist in countries that are civilized, enlightened, and advanced. Construct cathedrals, museums, and academic institutions. Also construct armies, battlefields, and, more unsettlingly, why do people still make enemies even when there seems to be peace? Projecting animosity onto co-workers, neighbors, strangers, and even those closest to them in their day-to-day existence. The conflict, in contrast to popular belief, is not an anomaly that happens only during emergencies or at the hands of despotic rulers. It is a deep expression of the human mind, a primitive pattern originating from both our innate biological tendencies and the social structure we have developed over time. Starting with the first tribal, the urge to battle has persisted throughout communities and complicated modern states, has only changed the battlefield, possibly moving from plains and forests to virtual arenas and institutional settings. Yet the logic of conflict still functions in the background of human conduct. This video makes the bold argument that war is a recurrent phenomenon rather than an exceptional one, a sign of the hidden forces that pervade societies and historical periods. Fear, a need for control, and projecting one's own shadow are the main causes. Ideas created by intellectuals like Friedrich Nietzsche, Carl Jung, and Michel Foucault's comprehension of the historical and psychological causes of this occurrence is vital for understanding the military conflicts that characterize our globe, as well as for realizing how these same, our everyday actions are shaped by dynamics in political conflicts and personal rivalries, ideological differences, and the minor altercations that occur on a daily basis. This video will ask you to see past the typical oversimplifications and examine how war, both visible and unseen factors, continue to influence our relationships and sense of self. More, you'll be forced to consider how you fit into this loop and how understanding these forces can pave the way for both individual and group transformation, as ultimately the basic question is not only why we fight, but also how to put an end to it. Music, against ourselves, against the world, and against each other. It is not sufficient to focus solely on contemporary wars in order to comprehend why people are so determined to battle one another, required to physically excavate the ancient soils of humanity in order to uncover the older layers of history. For Rousseau propagated the idea that the story of the noble savage was true for millennia, and maintained by Romantic thought currents the notion that in prehistoric man formerly coexisted peacefully with nature and his peers, and civilization with its institutions, power dynamics that tainted this prehistoric tranquility. But archaeology, this romanticized perspective, has been ruthlessly contested in the past 50 years in War Before. Lawrence Keeley, a civilization archaeologist, paints a somber picture of the human past through meticulous scientific documentation. Fact, according to archaeological sites in Europe and Asia, fighting is as old as humanity itself. Skeletons in the Americas with arrow marks on their skulls are unquestionably evidence. In certain areas, crude barriers built to defend towns from assaults were broken by club strokes. Over 20% of the skeletons found in ancient graveyards exhibit obvious evidence of violent demise, are not anomalies. Rather, they follow a pattern set by Neolithic Europe's first farmers. For instance, they constructed defensive palisades and ditches around their villages, which were not ornamental. They were constructions built by a group of people in reaction to a real and ongoing war of fear that was far from Keeley estimates. That the phenomena, which was intermittent, was a part of daily life. Compared to the industrialized world, these pre-state cultures had far greater rates of violence-related mortality. Despite the world wars, 20th century societies were still archaic. According to Pierre Clastres, war was not only driven by territory or economic advantages. His groundbreaking book, Society Against the State, offers a fascinating read for in many traditional communities. Fighting wars was a means of avoiding oppression. The political system purposefully resisted the consolidation of power. In contrast to governmental external conflict, leaders frequently lacked coercive authority and played a more symbolic role. Strangely acted as an internal regulator, maintaining groups' ongoing mobilization to stop in this situation, the rise of a dominant elite war was not merely a way to survival, but also a tool for maintaining social harmony. This scene compels use to reevaluate our more cozy beliefs about human nature. The conflict impulse was not brought about by civilization, nor is it a byproduct of past evolution. Rather, it originates from anything more profound than a psychological urge that appears to cut across epochs and cultures. The development of an enemy has always been essential to the formation of a group's identity. Determining who we are necessitates determining who we are not. Thus, battle has molded myths as well as regions and political boundaries since the beginning of time. Convictions and the fundamentally symbolic structure of human communities. Yet this results in a more disturbing query. Is war only a reflection of social and historical conditions, or is there a biological desire or ancestral drive ingrained in every person? It drives us to fight and eliminate the other in order to investigate this more sinister and intimate dimension. One must explore the realms of deep psychology and philosophy. Because if battle started in prehistoric fields and towns, it still exists in people's minds now, and if this information makes sense to you, it is exactly the route we will take. Thank you for your support. Please click the subscribe button to join the channel. Human conflicts are not limited to war as a historical or social event. Conflicts over resources or territory would overlook a far more troubling aspect, which is that the desire for the basic makeup of the human soul is etched with conflict. To fully comprehend it, one must consult not just history and archaeology, but also great philosophers delved into psychology and philosophy to discover the essence of human nature. Thomas Hobbes presented a harsh and clear analysis of the human condition in Leviathan. Hobbes natural because of his worries and desires. State man is not a tranquil being. Him an ongoing rivalry with others who lack a powerful central authority. If people controlled their behavior, they would unavoidably have a tendency to eat one another up. Thus his well-known adage, man is a wolf to man. In this context, war is not an instance, but peace is a delicate state of human relations in general. Jean-Jacques Rousseau provided a construction that was only upheld by hierarchies of power and the threat of punishment. Distinct yet equally illuminating viewpoint, according to which primordial man was free and tranquil, but was tainted by the development of social structures and private property. During this process, conflict and war in this sense would have resulted from the emergence of inequality. Civilization that is not of human origin, although even in Rousseau there are still understanding that once sparked, the urge for dominance takes root deeply. In turn, Freud's theories about the discontents of civilization spread throughout the hearts of mankind. Even more profoundly for him, the conflict instinct stems from an intrinsic desire that each person has a destructive death instinct, often known as Thanatos. Drive that must be restrained and subdued in order for civilization to survive. However, under stress, this tendency never really goes away. Instead, it bursts and shows up as violent behaviors. According to Freud, civilization is an arena of perpetual intolerance and conflict. Conflict between Thanatos' urge and Eros's for life and unity for destruction. Therefore, a troubling image of war arises from Hobbes to Freud, is a direct or sublimated expression of the impulses that all of us possess, not a sporadic anomaly. Something within of us reflects the adversary to be fought onto the other, which is what drives us to go to battle. Here, the idea of the shadow emerges, which is far more profound and frightening. Created by Carl Gustav Jung, who said that all people have in their dark parts of themselves that are unconscious and suppressed, fear unsatisfactory wants that cannot be incorporated, this shadow, into the self-image we create when the opponent is often perceived as unacknowledged and unproductive, the container of the traits we despise in ourselves. Conflict is fueled by this projection and keeps on going. War is eventually the externalization of our inner conflicts. But if the war instinct emerges in the unconscious, if it is driven by inner desires and the shadow, then the question that emerges is how are these forces are controlled, magnified, and guided by hierarchies of power, who benefits from the ongoing development of adversaries, which we must comprehend conversation, as well as psychology. It's time to advance to a new level of analysis to investigate how war is organized and justified by power. If conflict arises from the deepest human psychological urges, it is in the projection of one of its strongest and most pernicious processes, is the shadow that we discover. Carl Gustav Jung spent a large portion of his career investigating what he referred to as the shadow, the collection of desires, memories, and elements of personality that is suppressed, hidden, and rejected by the conscious ego. But what is denied doesn't go away. Rather, it gets stronger in the unconscious and looks for opportunities to show up. Itself, the shadow's projection, is an unavoidable occurrence. When people and groups fail to acknowledge their own shortcomings, fears, and evil tendencies, they wind up projecting when these attributes are applied to the other. The adversary is not a genuine person, but a psychological construct influenced by what we are unwilling to acknowledge about ourselves, making entire populations able to recognize in another group a nationality, religion, ethnicity, and the threat, the existential peril, ideology, and the manifestation of evil in the genealogy of morals. Nature went one step further and demonstrated that a large portion of what we refer to as morality originates from anger. a sense of helplessness and inadequacy that turns into, when unable to openly address their own shadow, the moralistic man assigns all moral superiority to hatred of the opponent, is therefore not merely a reactive feeling. Rather, it is a response to the horrors of the world, complex product of self-deception used to maintain a morally upright and pure self-image. This process has tangible and deadly repercussions. It is not merely an intellectual one. Dehumanization occurs when a collective casts its shadow on another group, because dehumanization is a prerequisite for rationalizing violence, as history is replete with instances of propaganda operations depicting entire populations as barbarian subhuman parasites, genocides, ideological conflicts, and political. Before persecution, the enemy constructed a symbolic structure, one that was actually merely a sinister mirror of the civilization that gave rise to it. This dynamic has not vanished with modernity. On the opposite, it has grown increasingly complex. These days, social media and communication technology intensify the polarization and projection processes in unheard-of speed, at which every political dispute and cultural discussion becomes a Manichean arena, with the good on one side and the evil on the other. Moralism permeates the vocabulary, and opponents are no longer viewed as complex. Humans are treated like cartoon characters that must be vanquished, shamed and eradicated during emergencies. This psychological, the more anxiety and uncertainty there is, the greater the demand. The more helpless you feel, the more likely you are to look for someone to blame. Whether leaders are conscious of it or not, the collective shadow looks for a way to release itself of this system or not, is able to deftly take use of these feelings to guide popular hatred for a handy target. The actual or imagined external enemy becomes the tool used to reconcile divisions, consolidate authority, and defend dictatorial, thus, steps to comprehend how people continue to make adversaries and uphold the logic of war. It is crucial to acknowledge that the adversary, prior to being a true enemy, the mirror is a psychological construct. It enables us to avoid staring at ourselves, but who constructs this mirror and shapes the stories that incite anger and terror? Therefore, it's essential to go into the domain of power and conversation, and that's exactly where we're going right now. Above all, war is created, and not just the result of unconscious projections or natural urges, through words, pictures, symbols, and stories that influence how we perceive the world. Words have a tremendous amount of power and can change. A neighbor turns into a traitor, a human being becomes a monster, and a whole country into an existential enemy. Speech produces reality in addition to describing it. Michel Foucault devoted his career to examining the ways in which discourse functions as a vehicle for power. Institutions such as the government, the media, the religious establishment, or the educational system shapes awareness in addition to controlling bodies and behaviors. They specify what can be stated, what can be believed, and what is true or untrue. And they establish the symbolic field where the opponent will be built during this procedure. Every protracted conflict needs a storyline. One group's desire to fight another is insufficient, required to support that desire, and the strongest defense is one that portrays itself as the undisputed objective truth. So national religious discourses, mythologies, and ideological theories that define the enemy is presented as a danger to morals and order between the U.S. and them. The group's very existence, eliminating any nuances and complexity. Other people become absolute, either by destroying us or by destroying them. In his analysis of modernity and its horrors, Zygmunt Bauman shown how, allegedly, it is not because their members are monsters that rational, civilized civilizations can be persuaded to perpetrate crimes, but because they were exposed to arguments that defended using violence as a means of advancement, purification, or defense. Irrational and mindless hatred did not cause the Holocaust. Rather, it was carefully crafted by a discursive mechanism that portrayed the Jew as a fundamental danger to the country's integrity, much as the Rwandan atrocities prior to the Soviet purges and the colonial wars. There were campaigns of symbolic building of the adversary in today's information-rich environment. The process has only accelerated in fractured social media. It has not vanished. Serves as the production sites for adversary algorithms that promote divisive information, create discursive bubbles where there is little room for empathy or conversation, inflame rage, and reinforce prejudices. Politicians now frequently accuse their opponents of being enemies of the country and war-related language. In reference to hate campaigns that spread like wildfire in a matter of minutes, even outside of the military, the rhetoric of eradication has grown commonplace. People are being influenced more and more to view the world from a Machiavellian perspective. Are the morally upright, enlightened, and just? They are the uneducated and immoral. The risky and the more radicalized the story, the more difficult it is to acknowledge the humanity of others. This is an unavoidably self-reinforcing loop, resulting in conflict, whether it be physical or symbolic. But if discourses influence the battlefield, it is also possible to try to turn off the war's mechanics there. To achieve this, first essential to understand how these tailies function in our day-to-day existence, even when there isn't a proclaimed war going on, because even during peace, the same hostile and polarizing tendencies still exist, and it is specifically on this hidden realm that we will explore further in the future. You'll find genuine benefit in my works Beyond the Shadow, which dissect Jung's fundamental concepts if you can relate to what I'm saying. Both are connected in the pinned page, while Dialogues with the Unconscious provides a 30-day plan to implement them in your life. Comment. The picture that comes to mind when we consider conflict frequently involves far-off battlegrounds with armed troops, tanks and bombers, but the truth is that the desire for war goes beyond the formal war's physical space, permeates social institutions in daily life. In modernity, human interactions and even our internal conflict have been diffused. Phenomena, an unseen force that influences our emotions and actions even in locations and periods, regarded as tranquil whenever someone feels the desire to one social group marginalizes another when a discourse is created to demonstrate their superiority at any costs. Degrade or figuratively destroy the adversary, we are seeing in a little expressions of the same pattern of animosity and division that feeds major conflicts. It is not hyperbole to state that modern communities are engaged in an ongoing symbolic conflict, a conflict of narratives, discourses, identities, and status. This conflict shows up in the workplace as toxic rivalries, power struggles, and emotional sabotage in families. which could seem like a covert battle for control, approbation, and recognition in love relationships. It's similar to a labyrinth of unsolved grudges, accusations, and the desire to succeed over the other rather than comprehending them, and naturally in public and the daily fight in political space is much more evident, as is the increasing polarization. The logic of media spectacle, driven by algorithms, continuously promotes the reasoning that we are no longer enemies with them, someone to converse with, since there are adversaries that must be vanquished. Every argument becomes a battleground. Language becomes more confrontational and moralism-laden when differences of opinion are viewed as an existential danger. Consequently, it is not unexpected that social media has turned into a never-ending battleground where individuals engage in everyday conflicts in pursuit of approval and a symbolic triumph. Yet this war logic is not forced upon us from elsewhere. Rather, it speaks to something that is inside of us, as we have observed the urge to cast the shadow in order to foment conflict and pursue moral superiority is profoundly ingrained in the mind. And when the technology and social surroundings provides ongoing avenues for nourishing these urges, making symbolic battle a crucial component of daily life, which leads to a society that is emotionally spent. Individuals who are constantly on high alert are habituated to viewing other individuals with mistrust, animosity, or apathy. There are significant consequences associated